All right, so welcome back, and we're going to start talking about blood types. Okay, I'm sure we all are somewhat familiar with different blood types. You kind of see these individuals, little cartoon characters, holding up the different types A, B, O, A, B. So we're going to talk about why they get their names and what this all means. Hide myself, and then let's get going. All right, so we're going to talk about what we mean by these blood types, how we get their names. We're going to talk about antigens and antibodies, which is going to be very important when we talk about blood types. Who can donate to who, and who can people receive from. Those are kind of our key discussion points. And this will also be reinforced in labs, so don't worry if you don't quite get it here, but we'll go over this again in class. All right. So here are our objectives. I want you guys to get 100% on this. I really want you guys to understand this. And we even have a game online that you can play. It's kind of fun. It's kind of entertaining the first few times at least. On blood typing. So I don't know. We'll just get going. I guess we'll also talk about the repercussions and what can go wrong, and not what can go wrong, but why we have to worry about bad blood transfusions. Okay. So hopefully looking at these two images, what you're seeing here on the left, they're both red blood cells in both of them. And hopefully you can see that the image on the left is sort of normal, but you can kind of see there's clumping going on here in the image on the right. And what we're having is basically a reaction to a bad blood transfusion. So you can kind of see the red blood cells all clumping up together here. I think maybe probably the first thing that should go through your mind is that, okay, if my blood cells kind of clump together like this, that's going to make it very difficult for them to get through blood passageways, right? So it'll be really hard for these cells to get through capillaries. They'll cause blockages. They can cause tissue damage, things like that. Another thing that you might be thinking is, well, their oxygen carrying capacity has got to be compromised. You'd be right. So all things like that, right? This is why we care. We can't have one of these kinds of reactions occurring that you're seeing here on the right. It is potentially deadly. All right, so what this machine actually is most blood banks and hospitals have one of these. Basically, these will automatically type blood for you, right? Again, it's going to be really important that we get this done when someone comes in unconscious and bleeding, that we get the right blood type. However, these machines can and do make mistakes. So even though, as you're working in a hospital or clinic, this kind of thing is automatically done for you, sometimes you have to do a manual or personal double check, again, to make sure that the machine didn't make a mistake before completing a transfusion, because again, it can be deadly. So sometimes you simply have to go old school, and you'll be seeing those processes in lab, actually. All right, so let's talk about these blood types. So up here on this top row, we have O, A, B, AB, negatives. And then down here on the bottom row, we have O, same ones, but now we have positive. Now, just by looking at these pictures, hopefully you can start seeing some kind of patterns. All of the negatives have the letters associated with them, right? So what I mean by that is AB has A, B. B has B. A has A. O, or 0, has nada, right? All right, well, that's not hard. And O positive has this RH. A positive has an A and an RH. Ooh. B has a B and an RH. AB has A and B and RH. So hopefully from this you have gathered that depending on what we're finding on the surface of the cell will give its type. So if it has A, it is A, B, it is B, AB, it is AB. And then whether or not we have this RH associated with it, if we find RH, it is then a positive. If there is no RH, it is considered a negative. Okay? So whoever decided to come up with the namings of blood types, they just decided instead of calling something BRH or ARH or ORH, they just called it positive. Does that make sense? Okay, so these things on the surface of these, surface of these cells, all of these that we said gave it its name, those things are called antigens. Okay, those are called antigens. Okay, so this is an antigen, this is an antigen, right? These are antigens. All those are antigens. That's what gives the blood type its name. Again, if we have the RH, it's a positive. If there is none, it's simply a negative. Okay. Now we have antigens and we have antibodies. Okay, and the antibodies will become important as far as like who can donate to who. Well, and so will antigens. They kind of work together. All right, so let's just take a look. So here we have type A blood, and we have type A antigen, just like we saw in the previous image. Here we have type AB blood, we have type A antigen, we have type B antigen, right? Here's type B blood, we just have the B. Here's type O, we see absolutely nothing, right? Now, if we think a little bit harder, we realize that this isn't just type AB blood or type A or type B or type O. These are all negatives, right? Because we do not see an RH anywhere here, right? Okay, so basically, we not only have antigens, but we also have antibodies. Okay? Now, the antibodies will bind to the blood type that essentially is not us. Okay, so let's take a look at this type A negative blood here. We are type A, right? We are type A. We have the A antigen. That means the thing that is not us is B. So we have these type B or anti-B antibodies, right? Let's try that again. Here we have blood type B. So our antibody is the thing that is not us. So that's A. So our antibodies are the thing that is not us. Okay, well, let's try that again. Here we have O. Well, what is not O is A and B, right? So we have both of those antibodies. Does that make sense? And then here we have type AB blood. Now if we take a look at this, there's A and there's B. There's nothing that's not us. So there are no antibodies. Does that make sense? So the antibodies are basically a thing that is not you. And we haven't discussed the RH type here. That will come into play in a second. Okay. So basically, let's just kind of look at them here, and I'm going to use my pen to draw. So we just said O had anti-A and anti-B, right? And the same is going to be true for the O positive. It's going to have things that are not it, anti-A, anti-B, right? Same thing here for the A negative. So the thing that is not it is anti-B. Same thing, anti-B. For the anti-B, I'm sorry, for the B type is anti-A. Again, anti-A. And then for AB, there are none. And then basically there are none. Now, you might be going right now, all right, well, what about this RH? What's the deal here? These guys have RH, these don't, so shouldn't we have an anti-RH here? And you are 100% correct. However, the anti-RH is a little bit unique. Okay, so here's anti-RH. And you're right, all of these guys will have it, all of them. The O negative, A negative, B negative, AB negative. However, you are not born with anti-RH antibodies. Okay. you must be exposed to the Rh antigen in order to form them. Or to say, in order to form the antibody. Okay? So again, you're right. So if I'm, let's do this. I'm going to pick A negative because it's a little bit easier as an example. We have A negative. We know it's A negative because we have our A antigen, no Rh, so it's A negative, and it has anti-B antibodies, right? Now, if this individual never has a blood transfusion, never comes into contact with, let's say, this A positive, where we do have the antigen, this is what they will look like. They will simply be anti-B antibodies floating around. Let's say, however, somehow, whether it's a maternal kind of thing or somehow their blood comes into contact with blood that has the Rh antigen in it, their body will start producing for the rest of their lives the anti-Rh antibody. Okay, but they have to be exposed to it first. Is that okay? Yeah? So again, when we're talking about blood transfusions, you never want to, if you're someone who's been in an accident or something, the people who are giving you a blood transfusion, if they type you as like an B negative or any of these negatives, they always assume that you already have this antibody because you don't want to make that mistake, right? So they always assume that you already have this antibody, this anti-Rh antibody floating around, all right? Even if you don't want to make that mistake. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense with the anti-Rh. And again, for these down here, so let me kind of back up one thing before we go on. So AB negative, right, the only thing that it might have, let's say it has been exposed, right, we assume that it has the anti-Rh antibody, because that's the only thing that is not it, right? So we assume that. So basically, AB positive is the only one that honestly does not have any antibodies, and O negative is the only one that doesn't have any antigens. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Okay, and this is just a summary slide kind of bringing everything together. So hopefully it'll help you visualize the cells that have the antigens and the antibodies on them. All right, so let's move on to sort of the next thing. Again, before we move on, before you move on, if you're having a hard time getting with this antigen antibody concept, please take a second, review it, and if you have any questions, let me know. Because once we get into transfusions and donations and receiving, it becomes really, really important. Okay, don't go on until you understand it because it'll only cause more confusion. All right. This is a wonderfully summarized, easy shorthand table. Okay, basically what this is saying is type O blood can donate to A, B, and AB. Type A blood can donate to AB. Type B blood can donate to AB. So basically, these are the ones that can donate to the others. Like AB cannot donate to anyone else. B can't donate to A can't donate to B. Right? You just follow the arrows. And then basically, someone who is negative, who does not have that Rh antigen on the surface of their cells, can donate to an Rh positive individual. However, someone who's Rh positive cannot donate to someone who's negative. Okay, so negative can donate to positive, positive cannot donate to negative. So that means A negative can donate to A positive, B negative can donate to B positive. However, B positive cannot donate to B negative. Okay, so based on this, what you maybe are starting to see here is O negative, would be the universal donor. It would be able to give to absolutely everybody, all the negatives, all the positives, right? And what you're hopefully seeing now is that AB positive is a universal recipient. It can get from everybody. Okay? So those terms. You probably have heard of those. Universal donor versus universal recipient. All right. So let's kind of go back a second. I think it actually works a little bit better if we go back to this one image here. One of the reasons why we can and cannot donate to one another is based on the antigens antibodies. So let's just say A tries to donate to B. What will end up happening is that the individual who has a type B blood, their anti-A antibodies will agglutinate, will trap, and kind of cause those clusters we saw of the A blood, which is no good, right? And vice versa. And then similarly, it would happen the same thing with the RHs. You can't donate to someone that has the antibody toward your antigen, okay? Because basically it'll cause agglutination to occur. All right. So what are some of the issues when you do donate, like you have an antibody antigen reaction, like the donation is not correctly matched up? Well, you have something called acute hemolytic reaction. Okay, that's the term. So very small symptoms are chills, fever, increased heart rate, which makes sense because that blood is agglutinizing, right? It's clumping up. So it's got to beat harder to, pump the blood. This causes chest pains, right? Especially these clots are getting into the lungs. The kidneys have a hard time filtering the blood. There's pain at lumbar region. That's usually due to those kidneys having a problem. That area where the transfusion occurred, it feels hot because, again, you're having this immune response. And then basically what ends up happening is you start having uncontrollable bleeding and then basically vascular shock. It is a bad, life-threatening condition, okay? So again, I cannot stress enough how important it is to make sure that we get this correct. Now, I should also mention that I'm using the term agglutination, and I can't remember if I had that written down anywhere. So let me just write it here. We are talking about agglutination when we're talking about antibody-antigen reactions. This is not the same thing, not the same as clotting. Okay, that clotting cascade, if you remember, was this big old clotting cascade. It dealt with fibrin threads, fibrinogen, thrombin, all that kind of stuff. We're not talking about any of that. We're talking about antibodies and antigens reacting, so we use the term agglutination. Do not confuse the two. They are not synonymous. Okay. Again, here you can kind of see that antibody-antigen reaction where we have the wrong blood type, and you can see the agglutination actually occurring. Okay. Here's another example of that. All right. What I'm going to ask you guys to do, again, because this tends to be a little bit mentally kind of challenging, sometimes to get the correct pairings. Take a minute, try to figure out who can donate to who at home. Let me know if you're running into any kind of trouble, basically like, can A plus donate to A negative? Can A negative, who can it receive from? Just ask yourselves that. Like, who can A negative receive from? Who can it donate to? What are the antigens? What are the antibodies? And go through each one of those blood types that were in that chart and try to answer those questions. So again, who can it donate to? Who can it receive from? What are the antigens? What are the antibodies? Okay, and if you have any trouble, there is an online blood typing game in Canvas. It's kind of fun. That'll help you understand blood typing. Come on. All right, you may have heard of blood typing folklore. This tends to be big in Asian countries. Not exactly sure why, particularly in Japan. So it's kind of like our horoscopes. Where if you're an Aries, you have these characteristics. If you're a Virgo, you have these characteristics. Well, they have these type, like blood type characteristics. So people, instead of asking like, what's your sign, they'll ask you, what's your blood type? And they'll be like, oh, well, clearly this person is absolutely selfish. They are a type B blood, right? Again, there's no scientific basis for this. It's just sort of Japanese folklore, kind of like horoscopes are our version of that. And let me just also like talk very briefly on the blood type diet. There's lots of garbage out there. This is one of the many bits of non-scientific garbage that's floating out there. The premise being that if you have a specific blood type, somehow that influences how you should eat in order to lose weight. That is absolutely the most ludicrous thing I've ever heard of. There are many people that are blood type, whatever, O negative, that are heavy, that are thin, that are whatever. It has nothing to do with your blood type. The fact that some antigen on the surface of your red blood cell has anything to do with, how you metabolize food is just ludicrous. Please do not fall into this. It's pseudoscience. It is just terrible. So anyway, blood type diet, just complete garbage. All right. And with that, I will end this lecture.